Have you ever asked yourself why, even after achieving everything you ever wanted, you still feel like something is missing? Does life truly have a deeper meaning, or do we convince ourselves it does just to cope with the emptiness inside us? And perhaps the most disturbing question of all, if death is the final destination, then why go on living at all? Exploring the life of Tolstoy, widely regarded as one of the most brilliant literary minds in history, reveals that this existential crisis isn't unique to our time. He experienced it with such intensity that it nearly destroyed him. In spite of his fame, wealth, and the love of his family, Tolstoy found himself facing a profound inner void, an emptiness no success could satisfy. He once confessed, "My life stopped. I could breathe, walk, eat, sleep, but life itself was gone from me." This wasn't a fleeting episode. It was a prolonged agony that greeted him every morning, robbing him of any reason to go on. His achievements brought no fulfillment. Philosophical inquiry failed to offer comfort. Science only made him feel smaller in the grand scheme of things. He stood at the edge of complete despair. Yet in the depths of his search, Tolstoy stumbled upon a realization he hadn't expected. A truth so ordinary he struggled for a long time to truly embrace it. It wasn't hidden in scholarly texts or intellectual debates, but in the lives of people he never imagined had anything to teach him. This insight transformed his existence, and it has the power to transform yours too. Let's step into Tolstoy's mind and uncover how a man who seemingly had it all came to understand that he had, in fact, nothing, and how that realization led him to discover a new reason to live. Lev Tolstoy possessed everything that most people long for: financial abundance, a devoted family, and a literary reputation enshrined through timeless works like War and Peace and Anna Karenina. Thinkers respected him. The general public read his stories with admiration. His legacy was already secured in the pages of history. Yet in a tragic twist, it was precisely during the height of his success that an overwhelming inner torment took hold. There was a void inside him that no praise or fame could fill. What he had achieved, instead of soothing his soul, only intensified the sense of futility. Each day he awoke with a heavy feeling, suffocated by a haunting thought that refused to let him go. If death ends it all, why does none of this make me feel alive? Tolstoy likened his life to that of a wanderer trapped in a shadowy forest, running in panic from a predator he couldn't see. That predator was death, always lurking, always near. But what struck him even harder was this: all his efforts to escape death only served to postpone the unavoidable. For many people, success and the purpose of life are almost one and the same. Society teaches us that reaching great accomplishments, earning recognition, and leaving behind a legacy are the routes to a life filled with meaning. But what happens when you finally arrive and find that the emptiness remains, or worse, that it grows even stronger? This was Tolstoy's most painful realization. He had followed the path that everyone called right. Yet in the end, all he encountered was a profound silence. Nothing ever felt sufficient. He understood that the happiness he sought was always just beyond reach. In the next book, the next project, the next success. But each time he attained what he aimed for, the joy vanished quickly, like water slipping through his hands. This frustration crushed him, not only because he couldn't find true purpose, but because he saw that this emptiness was far more widespread than it seemed. Looking around, he noticed many of his friends, intellectuals and artists alike, were caught in the same void. People who appeared to have control over their lives, yet were breaking down inside. It was a silent pain masked by outward success. Tolstoy began to question, has life always been like this, and I'm only just now becoming aware of it? This uncertainty drew him into a relentless cycle of deep reflection. He couldn't focus on his writing anymore. He no longer found joy in the things he used to love. Even his family, whom he cherished deeply, couldn't soothe his suffering. The core issue was simple. Time was slipping away, and he felt more and more that he was losing his own life without truly living it. What if success was just an illusion? What if everything he had built lacked genuine meaning? That uneasiness grew into despair when he realized that no matter what he achieved, the ultimate fate was the same for everyone. Not just for him, his legacy, his books, his influence, would one day vanish too. If even the greatest civilizations in history had disappeared without a trace, then why should the life of one man carry any lasting significance? Success felt like a broken promise. The world had told him that by attaining all these things, he would find fulfillment, but all he found was a deepening emptiness. And the hardest part was this. Once he saw the truth, there was no turning back. It was as if he had opened a door that could never be closed again. Doubt began to overwhelm him. If everything he had chased in life was nothing but an illusion, then where else could he search for meaning? In philosophy, in science, in religion? Or was the only option to accept life as absurd, without reason, without answers? Tolstoy set out on a new quest. What he didn't realize was that this journey would lead him into an even darker abyss before any light could be found. The void within Tolstoy was not something he could simply overlook. He was in need of answers. Something logical that could explain why life was worth living. Why he should keep existing, even knowing that death awaited everyone. To seek those answers, he did what any serious thinker would do. He immersed himself in philosophy. Tolstoy was convinced that the greatest minds in history must have wrestled with the same anguish, and that somewhere within the great philosophical texts, he would find a resolution. So he set out on his quest. He studied Plato, Aristotle, the existentialists, skeptics, and rationalists. He searched for answers in science, ethics, morality, and logic. But to his astonishment, the more he explored, the more hopeless he felt. Philosophy, rather than easing his pain, only intensified his inner turmoil. Take Schopenhauer, for instance, whose relentless pessimism seemed to validate Tolstoy's darkest fears. That life is a series of sufferings without any ultimate purpose. Kant, with his critique of pure reason, demonstrated that the meaning of life cannot be proven through rational thought. Nietzsche dismissed any fixed idea of purpose, viewing the quest for meaning as a human invention. None of these perspectives resolved his dilemma. In fact, they reinforced the idea that existence was random, a meaningless fragment within a vast cosmic drama. Science was even harsher. While examining biology and physics, Tolstoy encountered a universe that was indifferent, ruled by cold and impersonal laws. According to science, life was no more than a set of chemical reactions and biological processes. A cosmic accident devoid of intent or significance. Death was not a passage to something else, but simply the absolute end of all we have been. This truth left Tolstoy feeling profoundly powerless. If reason, science, and philosophy could not provide a satisfying explanation for life's purpose, where else could he turn? He began to feel like a stranded sailor drifting aimlessly on a sea of useless answers. His suffering was not merely intellectual, it began to impact his physical health. He experienced insomnia, neglected his diet, and withdrew from those he loved. At night, he woke with a heavy unease, overwhelmed by the thought that, over time, everything would change. His children would grow, grandchildren would arrive, and eventually his name might fade into oblivion. All his efforts, his legacy, his very existence felt insignificant compared to the vastness of time. It was at this point that he confronted one of the most disturbing questions of his life. If everything eventually transforms, what reason is there to go on? This doubt haunted him, dragging him into profound reflection. In his work confession, he reveals having to remove certain objects from his environment, fearing that in moments of despair, his own mind might betray him. It was more than an emotional crisis. It was the result of a deep existential struggle with the meaning of being. If life had no absolute significance and nothing truly held a definitive purpose, then continuing to live became an almost unbearable ordeal. Yet amid that inner turmoil, something inside him endured, a sensation he couldn't quite grasp. Despite his uncertainties and suffering, he was unable to fully accept that life's meaning was just a product of the mind. There was something within him that refused to surrender. What was it exactly? A natural survival instinct? An unconscious dread of the unknown? Or perhaps, after all, the meaning of life truly existed, but he simply needed to seek it in a different place. Tolstoy didn't have the answer, but the mere fact that his doubt persisted, that he still couldn't accept death as the final and only conclusion, meant his quest was far from over. He chose to look beyond philosophy, science, and intellectual discourse. If the greatest thinkers on earth had failed to provide an answer, maybe the solution was somewhere else. Maybe, just maybe, he had been looking for meaning in the wrong places all along. So he began observing those who had never studied Kant, Schopenhauer, or Nietzsche, people without wealth, fame, or public acclaim, people who didn't spend hours pondering philosophical dilemmas, yet somehow appeared to live with a calmness he had never experienced. Tolstoy was on the verge of uncovering something that would transform his life forever. He felt caught in a maze with no escape. He had searched for answers in philosophy, science, and logic, but none eased his pain. In fact, the deeper he delved, the stronger his despair became. It was as if life itself was exposing an unsettling truth. If everything comes to an end, what true meaning can anything we do hold? This question started to dominate his mind. The activities that once brought him joy, writing, spending time with his family, began to lose their significance. Everything felt like part of an endless cycle with no clear purpose, a game everyone played to avoid confronting the inevitable. In his writings, he revealed his despair through words that reflected his internal conflict. Gradually, melancholy consumed him. He distanced himself from the things that used to inspire him, avoided deep conversations, and preferred solitude. But what troubled him most was how his thoughts kept returning to a single haunting question. How could he free himself from this overwhelming emptiness? In confession, Tolstoy recounted having to alter his environment, fearing that during moments of profound hopelessness, his mind might betray him. Day by day, the doubt about the purpose of his existence became harder to ignore, casting a persistent shadow over his life. Yet something within him held firm. An inexplicable force prevented him from taking that final step. He wasn't sure what it was exactly. Was it a survival instinct? A subconscious fear of the unknown? Or perhaps a truth he had yet to recognize? That small hesitation was what ultimately spared him from total collapse. He understood that if a part of him still resisted surrendering, then maybe his quest was far from over. If the philosopher's answers failed to bring him peace, and if suicide was not a genuine solution, Then only one path remained: to seek meaning where he had never looked before. Thus, Tolstoy began to view the people around him with new eyes. He started noticing those who, despite lacking wealth, fame, or formal education, seemed free from that inner torment. These individuals, peasants, laborers, and workers, did not suffer the same existential dread. They didn't spend sleepless nights pondering the purpose of life. Instead, they simply lived, embracing simplicity and acceptance. And in some way, they appeared more at peace than any intellectual Tolstoy had encountered. This captivated him deeply. How could people with only the bare essentials be more content than he? One of Russia's most influential figures? What knowledge did they possess that he lacked? Without fully realizing it, Tolstoy was on the cusp of discovering a profound truth that would forever reshape his understanding of life's meaning. He began focusing on those who had never studied Kant, never debated Schopenhauer, and paid no mind to Nietzsche's philosophy. Peasants, humble laborers, artisans, people who, at first glance, lived tough lives devoid of luxury or notable achievements. Yet unlike the intellectuals and aristocrats he knew, these people were not overcome by despair. They woke early, worked diligently, and faced daily hardships, but without the overwhelming burden of existential anxiety. They weren't desperately searching for life's meaning, because in a way, they already lived within it. This intrigued Tolstoy even more. How could these people, who logically should feel the weight of existence even more, live so peacefully? How did they continue without succumbing to doubt? The answer was straightforward yet profound. They didn't ponder the meaning of life, they embodied it. Tolstoy realized that while he and other thinkers sought meaning through intellect, these people discovered it through experience in honest labor, in family bonds, in the rhythms of nature, and in faith. They had no need for rational explanations to justify their existence. Simply being alive, being part of something larger than themselves, was enough. He began engaging with peasants and noticed a recurring theme in their stories. None held the philosophical solutions he sought, yet all shared a quiet confidence, a life acceptance he had never truly known. They didn't feel compelled to prove life's meaning. They simply trusted that it existed. This realization transformed everything for Tolstoy. For the first time, he entertained the possibility that perhaps he had been seeking meaning in the wrong place. Maybe the real mistake was believing life's meaning was a riddle to be solved, when in fact it was something to be felt. Then another insight came to him. Most of these individuals shared a common trait, something Tolstoy had dismissed for much of his life: faith. But their faith was not about theological arguments or abstract concepts. It was something they lived out, a natural confidence, a bond with something greater, beyond mere logic. They never questioned whether life had meaning because they simply and directly believed. They were part of something larger than themselves. Tolstoy began to realize that his own existential crisis stemmed from his insistence on absolute proof of life's purpose. But what if such proof simply did not exist? What if the meaning of life wasn't a truth to be uncovered through reason, but a reality to be experienced through surrender? This realization started to shift his entire perspective on the world. For the first time in many years, Tolstoy felt a flicker of peace. Though he still lacked all the answers, he began to grasp that perhaps he didn't truly need them. Maybe the real mistake was trying to control what could never be controlled. And this thought led him toward a new and decisive transformation. Tolstoy, the great rational mind, the brilliant author who had delved deeply into the human soul through his writings, found himself confronted with a truth he had long resisted. Perhaps the meaning of life was not something to prove, but something to live. Faith, which he had long regarded as a childish illusion, started to emerge as the only answer that made sense. But it was not blind faith, forced by dogma or hollow tradition. What Tolstoy observed in the peasants was a practical form of faith, a way of living that demanded no logical evidence because it was rooted in direct experience. These people trusted life itself. They did not despair when faced with death because they viewed their existence as part of a greater whole, something they didn't need to fully comprehend to accept. Faith to them was not a theory but a daily practice. It manifested in honest labor, commitment to family, and the simplicity of their everyday lives. Tolstoy, who had studied the greatest philosophers in history, came to see that none of them had granted him the peace that a humble peasant felt when rising each morning to work the land. This led him to ponder, what if the pursuit of absolute meaning was actually the very thing preventing people from finding peace? What if the error was trying to boil life down to a logical formula, when in reality life is a mystery to be experienced, not solved? This idea transformed him. For the first time, Tolstoy began to entertain the thought that perhaps the real meaning of life wasn't found through reason, but through surrender, through love, and through connection with others. In accepting that some things can't be explained, yet still exist and matter, he realized that the happiness of these people didn't stem from intellectual certainty, but from a trust in life itself, from embracing the notion that there is something beyond the ego, beyond vanity, beyond the desire to be remembered or admired. Tolstoy wrote in Confession, "I spent my life searching for proof when all I truly needed was to trust. The answer was always present, but I refused to acknowledge it." This insight brought him a sense of relief. He no longer needed to battle the emptiness. He no longer had to demonstrate that life had meaning, because deep within, he already sensed it. All that remained was to stop resisting and simply live. Thus began his final profound transformation. Tolstoy's discovery was not a sudden flash of enlightenment, but a gradual and deep process. He came to see that his life had been built around external accomplishments, fame, fortune, intellectual acclaim. Yet none of these had granted him peace. Now he understood that the genuine meaning of life was much simpler: to live authentically, to love without expecting anything in return, to accept existence without demanding logical justification. This realization changed everything. Tolstoy no longer wished to be a nobleman. He rejected the pursuit of wealth and writing to impress the elite. He began discarding the values he once cherished. He adopted plain clothing, gave up luxury, and even sought to donate his possessions. However, not everyone embraced his transformation. His family, used to an aristocratic lifestyle, viewed his new outlook as a threat. His wife, Sophia, was appalled by his choice to abandon wealth and embrace simplicity. Their once strong marriage became a battleground between two clashing worlds. Yet Tolstoy remained resolute. He devoted himself to humanitarian work, aided peasants, advocated nonviolence, and promoted a life grounded in humility and compassion. He believed that only love and faith could impart true meaning to life. The only meaning of life is to serve and to live with love. But even with this transformation, peace eluded him. He continued to feel internal struggle, a sensation that despite his new beliefs, he was caught in a world that did not share his vision. At the age of 82, unable to endure the tension within his household any longer, he made a drastic choice. He fled. Under the cover of night, Tolstoy left his estate and embarked on a journey without a fixed destination. He wanted to escape it all: money, family conflicts, society's expectations. He wished to spend his final days living purely and simply as a man. However, his body was no longer able to obey his will. During his journey, he fell seriously ill and was discovered at a small train station in Ostapovo, surrounded by a handful of friends and strangers. He passed away there, far removed from the luxury he had once enjoyed. His passing was deeply symbolic. Tolstoy dedicated his life to searching for answers. He ultimately found peace through simplicity, but his path was fraught with the tension between the world he wished to leave behind and the new direction he had chosen to pursue. His story leaves us with an important question. Are we seeking meaning in the wrong places? Might the true meaning of life not lie in fame, fortune, or recognition, but instead in the small moments, in love, compassion, and embracing the present? Tolstoy did not unravel the mystery of life through theories or words. He came to understand that meaning is not about fully comprehending life, but about living it wholeheartedly with love and intention. Tolstoy's story is more than that of a great writer. It is the journey of a man brave enough to confront the most profound question of all. What is the purpose of life? He possessed everything society encourages us to desire: success, wealth, status, and yet he experienced a profound emptiness. When he sought answers through philosophy and science, he realized that logic alone could not satisfy the soul. But it was by observing peasants, humble laborers, those who lived without lofty intellectual pursuits, that he uncovered a truth that transformed his life. The meaning of existence isn't discovered through the mind, but through lived experience. Peace does not arise from theories or outward accomplishments, but from how we inhabit the present moment, the relationships we nurture, and the love we give and receive. Tolstoy came to see that life is not a puzzle to be solved, but a mystery to be embraced. And this is the reflection we leave with you. Could it be that we are searching for meaning in all the wrong places? Are we, like Tolstoy, convinced that happiness will come after one more achievement, one more accolade, one more success? Or has the answer always been right before our eyes in the simplest aspects of life? Tolstoy devoted his life to seeking that answer, and in the end, he realized that meaning does not need to be proven, it only needs to be felt. Perhaps that is the genuine secret of life. If you've come this far, congratulations. It means Tolstoy's journey has touched something inside you. Perhaps an age-old question, perhaps a quiet restlessness that you have yet to name. But now, what do we do with this question? Tolstoy spent his life chasing an absolute answer until he understood that maybe the error was in trying to find a final, definitive meaning. What if the purpose of life isn't something to be uncovered, but rather something to be experienced, something that doesn't require explanation, only to be felt in those quiet, often overlooked moments? Now let me ask you, what is it that gives your life meaning? That's a question only you can answer. If this video sparks some reflection within you, then that reflection was meant especially for you. Share it with someone who might be going through a similar struggle. Let's spread these thoughts and start new conversations. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Doing so helps videos like this reach a wider audience and lets these important discussions continue to grow. If you think this story has come to an end, think again. Right now, there are 2 videos on the screen that will leave you with even more questions, or perhaps some surprising answers. Choose one and keep exploring. But be warned, after watching, you might never look at life the same way again. See you there.